Hello and welcome to Agri History. This will be our first and only episode of Season 4, Forages. In this episode, we will talk about the domestication of triticale and alfalfa. We will begin with alfalfa. It is difficult to trace the origins of alfalfa. There is many disagreements on which location in the Near East alfalfa was cultivated. It is known that it was cultivated in the Near East 9,000 years ago. Based on current evidence, alfalfa was likely spread throughout the Middle East by 1000 BC, and from there to China and India. But the evidence we have does not support that hypothesis fully, and as such we need more evidence. The first written references to alfalfa, in terms of introduction, suggests that alfalfa came to Greece by means of the Medes armies. From there, it was spread to Italy, then all across the Roman Empire, and then into Europe. Interest in alfalfa regressed in Europe during the Middle Ages. Alfalfa was reintroduced into Spain through North Africa when the Moors invaded Spain. Alfalfa then spread went across the Pyrenees around the 15th century. Alfalfa was then introduced to Mexico, Peru, and Chile by the Spanish in the 16th century. Alfalfa was then spread to California via trade with Chile. It was first known as Chilean clover. Along the paths that alfalfa was spread through, feral populations of alfalfa are found. They frequently dwell in a wide variety of open habitats, such as roadsides and field borders. However, wild populations of the cultivated subspecies, known as sativa alfalfa, are rare. The exceptions to this rule are the Iberian Peninsula and its center of origin. In other Western Mediterranean countries like southern France, Italy, Greece, and North Africa, hybrids between the sativa subspecies and the falcata subspecies are found very commonly. The falcata subspecies seems to be a more common form of the wild alfalfa than the sativa group, as this subspecies is found from the northern parts of the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the northern limits of Russia. And this subspecies is particularly well adapted to hard winters and hot and dry summers, typical of continental climates. We will come back to this later. Based on current DNA evidence, there seems to be a 30% loss in genetic diversity. This is a result of the domestication process, likely. The genetic evidence also suggests that there are at least two paths of dissemination from a center of origin for alfalfa. There are several sources of genetic diversity within alfalfa, however. The first is the wild subspecies found in their center of origin, which have many interesting traits such as superior plant architecture and tolerance to drought and grazing. The second source is the hybrid and feral populations found in various countries. The third source is the gene flow between wild alfalfa found in Spain and cultivated varieties of alfalfa. Now on to triticale. Triticale is a man-made crop produced by crossbreeding wheat and rye together. All octopoid triticale cultivars have two chromosome pairs from each species. Triticale cultivars were initially made by crossbreeding wheat and rye together to create sterile wheat-rye hybrids. This was done through conventional plant breeding techniques. Then, through the use of culture seed applications, the chromosome numbers were double, making the plant fertile. Most of the primordial strains of triticale were octoploid in nature, but through experimentation, different levels of ploidy were developed over time for evaluation purposes. The octoploid showed little promise, but the hexaploid triticale was successful enough to find commercial application. The first experiments of what would be known as triticale goes back to the late 1870s. The first rye-wheat crossbreeds were made, producing sterile hybrids. The first fertile triticale was produced by a plant breeder named Ronfort in 1888 from rye-wheat crossbreeds, one of which underwent a mutation that doubled the chromosome number. Over the next 50 years, isolated experimentation and research occurred throughout Europe. and by the 1960s, the first commercial releases became available for growers of Triticale. These cultivars were formed from second-generation hybrids made by crossbreeding two kinds of Triticale together. Later on, improved versions of Triticale were bred from durum wheat and rye to make hexaploid Triticale, which had superior vigor and reproductive stability compared to the octoploid type. The first Triticale of hexaploid origin was reported in 1938, followed by others from various locations, for example, United States, Japan, Hungary, and Russia. Breeding efforts during the 1940s and early 1950s concentrated on the production and intercrossing of both octoploid and primary Triticale strains, although those types of cultivars were of little use commercially. The breeding programs for commercial production were heavily done in Spain, Hungary, and Canada. This led to the breeding of several important cultivars for commercial Triticale production. The Hungarian breeding program produced the cultivars 64 and 57. Spain produced Charullo in 1968, and Rosner was produced in Canada in 1969. In 1953, the University of Manitoba in Canada began the first American Triticale breeding program. The breeders there worked mostly with durum wheat and rye crossbreeds. The early breeding efforts concentrated on developing high-yielding, drought-tolerant, human food crops suitable for marginal wheat-producing areas. Both winter and spring types of the species was made. There was, however, an emphasis on spring types. To know what I'm talking about when it comes to spring versus winter Triticale, stay tuned for my episode on wheat in Season 5. In the meantime, let's look over some strains of alfalfa and Triticale. First, you'll talk about alfalfa strains. The first strain you'll talk about is the Variegated Alfalfas. These Variegated Alfalfas are crossbreeds between the purple-flowered sativa subspecies and the yellow-flowered falcata subspecies we talked about earlier. Most of the cold-tolerant varieties in Canada are of this type. These hybrids have been used to breed cultivars with winter hardiness, good drought tolerance, good yield, and satisfactory regrowth. The next strain on our hit list will be the Flemish type alfalfa. This type of alfalfa is pure sativa in genetics. The strains we use have their origins in northern France. They have purple flowers, early growth, and quick harvesting recovery, but only moderate winter hardiness compared to the variegated type. Flemish alfalfas also mature 2 to 5 days earlier than variegated types. I will talk about the most important cultivar in Triticale, Armadillo. The Armadillo breed formed from accidental crossbreeding with hexaploid Triticale and a new breed of wheat that had Norin 10 genes, which dwarfed the wheat, making it easier to apply fertilizer and increase yield. This breed was made in the organization CIMMYT in Mexico. These Armadillo strains were used to breed the cultivar Armadillo, which had all the character traits needed for a good grain crop: dwarfness, early maturity, good nutritional quality, and in Mexico, insensitivity to day length. Due to its benefits, by 1970, every Triticale bred in the CIMMYT organization had Armadillo in its pedigree, and all the breeders around the world that bred Triticale also used Armadillo materials to improve their own strains as well. This concludes Season 4 of Agri History. Stay tuned for Season 5, where we talk about grains. See you then!